Hey guys, what is going on? So today I wanted to talk about training the shoulders and the upper chest and just doing pressing in general and how we can bias our shoulders or our chest or whatever we're looking to do on our presses based on a variety of different things, either the range of motion that we do, the grip width, the angle, our arching, any of those things, and how we can actually influence those things in a positive manner to grow the muscles we're trying to grow. And so the thing that really sparked me wanting to make this video was a recent change that I had in my training. And it was largely just me not really thinking about what I was doing too much in terms of my form because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that was kind of the mentality that I had with my shoulder pressing. And so for me in the past, I have never really spent a whole lot of time shoulder pressing. And that may surprise some people because my shoulders have historically, when I'm lean and when I'm training them, have kind of been one of my better body parts, or when it comes to my shoulder pressing strength, kind of one of my stronger lifts. But I really have not emphasized shoulder training all that much. And I would say this is largely just attributed to me not having a difficult time growing my shoulders. And so there's not a lot of drive for me to do something I'm good at. I tend to focus my time on things that I'm bad at. And that is kind of a very rewarding journey, I would say, because every little increment that you gain on something that you're bad at is far more rewarding than the opposite. And so for me, I think my shoulders growing could be a combination of genetics, but I also think it's potentially some of the things I did when I was younger to kind of bias my shoulders a little bit more. Not something that I was intentionally trying to do, but then looking back, I do think that had an impact. But we can just chalk it up to genetics for the time being. So for me, getting really big and strong shoulders was never a priority for me, and therefore I didn't put much emphasis into my shoulder training. And so I just kind of pressed a certain way, and I just never really changed it. And the way that I would press, and this I have learned recently through just observation, and I've never really thought about it, kind of embarrassing, but the way that I used to press, I would say, is much more biasing towards the upper chest. And one way that we can fix this, well, there are multiple ways that I will talk about, but one way that we can fix this, I think, is very commonly known, and a couple are maybe things that you wouldn't think to do, but definitely have an impact. So when it comes to pressing, a lot of people, obviously you want that deeper range of motion. It's more impressive. It's harder, everything like that. When you're getting in this really deep shoulder flexion position, you're actually bringing the upper chest into the movement a lot more. And so this is maybe counterintuitive to some people, but this is something that I actually learned relatively recently, which is somewhat embarrassing, but that is just one aspect of the way that I used to shoulder press. So I would shoulder press from here, the collarbone, and I would get more of a contribution in that kind of upper chest area. Then as I progressed throughout the lifts, then my shoulders would take over. Great, I would still work my shoulders. But what I found over time is that when I wanted to emphasize the stretch position more, which is kind of that craze that the fitness industry talked about, maybe 2-3 years ago a lot, where everything had to be focused on the stretch, well, I would start to pause in this position and really milk it. And I think that even bias the upper chest to a greater degree. If you're not familiar with, doing paused benching or doing, deep stretch positions, you'll find that if you get extremely strong in that bottom position, you can actually have that momentum carry you throughout the rest of the press, and that can actually take away stimulus as you move up throughout the movement. So if you're really powerful out of the bottom, but really weak in the top, you might not even know that you're weak in the top because you're just so powerful out of that bottom position. And if you're biasing a certain muscle group, in this case, the upper chest to a greater degree, especially when you're pausing, that is just going to further reinforce the movement pattern that the upper chest is getting, further reinforce that strength. And so for me, pausing out of this bottom position on all my lifts, I found, oh wow, I'm really getting strong at this. But I found that it didn't really transfer over all that much to my overhead pressing strength as I would get better in those lower rep ranges. And again, this is not something that I really thought about too much until recently, but the way that I used to press would still be in that, really stretched position, but I wouldn't pause. And so it emphasized that lower part of the lift a little bit less and challenged that mid-range just a little bit more. And that mid-range is where the shoulders start to have a lot more of an advantage and can really move weight. And so for me, historically, I built my shoulders years and years ago doing overhead presses and doing some side laterals, but mostly from overhead presses. And I didn't pause at the bottom. So that was a lot of shoulder development that I got without really even knowing that, not pausing was benefiting me in that aspect. So one, going through that full deep stretch is going to bias the upper chest a little bit more. Two, pausing in that bottom position is going to bias that upper chest more. And then three, our hand position as well. So as we bring it in here, we're again further increasing that stretch. As we bring it out here, we actually give our shoulders a better opportunity to contribute to the lift. And I think when we look at strongmen, we look at guys who are extremely strong shoulder pressers, we notice that they don't bring the bar down all the way. We notice that they take a wider grip, which is interesting because when we're talking about strongmen, generally those are taller individuals who tend to favor the closer grip when it comes to like a close grip, or just a standard bench press. They tend to turn it into more of like a close grip bench press. And when we don't see that with the shoulder pressing, it's like, I wonder why that is. And I think part of that is just due to the specificity of strongmen, the way that they lift, and they're doing a log press or something like that. But I do think there is something to that. And I have found that the strongest overhead pressers tend to go with a wider grip, tend to bring it down more here, and they're not emphasizing that stretch position to the same degree. Now, they may still pause in this position, but this is a more shoulder bias position. So it's okay to pause from that position, whereas pausing from this bottom position brings the upper chest into the equation. I noticed as I did more shoulder pressing, even though that was a lift that I was relatively good at, and I did a whole bunch of bench pressing, and a lot of the bench pressing I did was with a close grip in a similar situation where I'm getting more shoulder flexion, I'm getting some upper chest activation. What I found interesting is that despite never doing incline presses, my incline press was my strongest lift, relatively speaking. And now looking back and seeing that everything that I was doing was actually biasing that upper chest, it starts to make a lot more sense. So on the flip side, if we wanted to grow our shoulder press, one way that we can actually do this without actually doing the lift is just simply doing a close grip bench. So a close grip bench is going to have a similar movement pattern, but obviously as opposed to working on that upper chest and the shoulders a little bit more, we take the shoulders out of the equation a bit and we put the chest more into focus with the bench press. But when we do a close grip press, we are bringing the upper chest into the movement a little bit more. And one way to even further bias that is to have a flat back. So when we do flat back benching, we're essentially shifting up the emphasis to the higher fibers. So if we are doing a decline press, we're just focusing on that lower chest just a little bit more. If we are doing a flat press, obviously more of the mid chest. And as we arch our back, we shift the emphasis down to a more kind of decline position. And as we straighten our back and actually have a flat back, doing something like a Larson press, or I even prefer putting the feet up on the bench to really make sure that the back is flat, that's going to shift the emphasis more to that upper chest area. And that is shockingly what I used to do a whole lot of the time. And so I was just further reinforcing this movement pattern of growing the upper chest and biasing that. So if we really do want to grow the upper chest, pausing in the bottom is always going to be good for the chest. Having the back flat is going to shift the focus further up. And so if we're doing a shoulder press and we want to work the shoulders, it makes sense to not arch our back. Now, if we want to bring the upper chest into the equation a little bit more, then we can arch our back a little bit more. Now, then we start talking about rib cage expansion and everything like that. And that's a whole nother topic. And I don't know enough about that to really go into detail on that. But I would say the whole arching part of it and, adding into the way that we're getting extra shoulder flexion when we're bringing in the hands closer together, we really have to start thinking about how we are emphasizing different muscle groups. So for me, the way that I started doing my pressing now is not bringing it all the way down, widening my grip, and again, pausing in that bottom position. When I'm putting tension on the shoulders, that is going to bias the shoulders a little bit more. If you are reversing it, you want to go with a more narrow grip, you want to go all the way down, you want to pause from here, that's going to emphasize the upper chest a little bit more. And if you really wanted to emphasize the upper chest, then you would actually go more for like an incline press, and that would be still beneficial for the shoulders, but you would put more of that emphasis on the upper chest. Now on the flip side, When we're talking about developing any part of the chest, same rules apply that I talked about before. So if we wanted to emphasize the lower chest, which I think is very underrated, that's something that I personally am doing. Something that I haven't done ever is emphasize my lower chest, and that's something that I'm doing now. So I'm doing a lot of dips, I'm doing decline presses, and in general, I'm just not trying to emphasize my upper chest. So I personally don't do anything in particular to bias the upper chest. I don't do any incline press or anything like that. I think my upper chest is already one of the stronger parts of my body. But if that was you and you wanted to implement upper chest training, you could take some of the tips I talked about there. If you have an overly developed lower chest, probably shy away from decline presses, probably shy away from the excessive arching on your bench press, maybe shy away from dips, which is a shame to say because I've really fallen in love with dips recently, but I am somebody who is trying to grow my lower chest. And so we have to think about how we're doing our presses. And just because we can lift more weight with a certain method, just because we can cut the range of motion shorter, doesn't mean that is what we should be doing depending on how we're trying to bias the lift. Now, if we're trying to, again, I'm trying to emphasize my lower chest, so having more of an arch on a bench press would be more beneficial for somebody like myself. But as I am doing decline presses on a machine and as I'm doing dips and stuff like that, I don't feel the need to do arching, but that would be a smarter strategy for somebody like myself. If you're trying to bias the upper chest, get rid of that arching, stuff like that. Now, the triceps, that's another part of the equation that I could make a million different videos on, because just as I talked about how I haven't emphasized shoulder training due to my genetics or whatever it be that allows my shoulders to grow in size and strength a lot easier, my triceps are the opposite. My triceps are horribly difficult to grow, and so I have a ton of experience training triceps and I have a ton of tips on that, and that is something that I'm implementing through this training cycle that I'm doing now to bring up my triceps very slowly, as has been the case for my entire lifting career. But I think it's actually accelerating a little bit as I'm implementing new strategies and learning over time, and I think the tricep training has been going really good. So as I implement this specific way to target my shoulders, as I already have a relatively strong upper chest, as I'm building out the lower chest, and then as we continue to improve the triceps in a very slow grind, I think this will all come together for holistic pressing strength. And I would say in general, obviously you should bias whatever you care about. If you want a bigger upper chest, bigger lower chest, you change the way that you press to do that. But I think holistic strength makes a lot of sense, and that's something that I have not been great at in the past. And now that I'm implementing shoulder-specific strategies, lower chest-specific strategies, I think that's going to transfer over to more holistic strength for me. And if you guys have any questions about ways that we can impact our pressing to bias different muscle groups, I would be happy to answer them or talk about them in DMs, comments, whatever. I love talking about this stuff, and I am really getting back into pressing again, so I'm having a lot of fun thinking about this stuff, talking about it, stuff like that. So hopefully this process will allow me to bench 500 pounds in the foreseeable future, and hopefully some of you guys can follow me along the way. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you soon.